Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Hokyoji's Sunday Dharma Talk. Today is November 7th, 2021. We're grateful to have Ryushin Jan Freier giving the talk this morning. Ryushin is a longtime practitioner, a Zen practitioner, who started practicing at Minnesota Zen Meditation Center in 1985. He received lay ordination there in 1988, and he worked as a tenzo and other mostly kitchen-related jobs until 1994. He attended Clouds and Water Zen Center for a couple of years, starting in 2002. In 2016, he became a member of both the Hokyoji and Compassionate Ocean Dharma centers. He gives Dharma talks at Compassionate Ocean sometimes, and sometimes he gives Dharma talks here. And thank you, Ryushin. We're very grateful for your talk this morning. And thank you, everyone, for being here. So with that, I'll pass it over to you, Ryushin.
So I got an email from Dokai last night saying that the planning weekend is happening at the same time as my talk. So that's why there's so few people here, which is kind of interesting. And I don't want to interfere with planning, that's for sure. So I do have a talk, and so Dokai suggested turning it more into a discussion, but I'm not that skilled. So I have a talk that has a beginning, middle, and end, and I'm kind of interested in seeing where it goes, because just sitting with it this morning, there's a lot of places where this could either go off the rails or go somewhere. So I'm kind of interested to see how things go. And I'd really like to acknowledge Aaron's talk from last week, that it really helped me bring my talk together. And it may not even be apparent even to Aaron that that's the case, but a lot of different factors. I try to integrate a lot of different things into a talk, and it's not easy, and it's not even possible sometimes, but her talk really helped me do that. So, and I'd like to acknowledge the state of the world, since it's kind of a mess. So this is from a recent email I got from The Atlantic, because I subscribe to The Atlantic. So they send me an email about once a day. So if you're not feeling 100%, you're not alone. In a recent NPR poll, half of households reported that someone in the home was experiencing serious problems with depression, anxiety, stress, or sleep. One bi-weekly Census Bureau survey estimated that almost 1 in 3 Americans was experiencing symptoms of depression or anxiety alone. Even after all this time, after all the supposed adjusting to the new normal, Americans are still struggling with their mental health under the weight of a once-in-a-lifetime outbreak and all the grief and hurting that's coming with it. So then there's bullet points. The pandemic is still making us feel bad. Humans aren't huge fans of uncertainty. Yeah, we can certainly relate to that. The arrival of the Delta variant introduced another round of uncertainty this summer. And the American workplace isn't built to handle this much grief, or any grief at all. Without federal protection in the form of a standard paid bereavement policy, grieving American workers are subject to the whims of state legislatures and individual companies. And then my favorite bullet point is people are turning to best-selling self-help books on trauma. So unfortunately, they mentioned that these books just aren't up to the task of dealing with a pandemic, climate change, disaster, and democracy in peril all at the same time. It's kind of overwhelming. And so we're all overwhelmed. And I had a lot of friends, including myself, this summer who were in difficult situations, waiting for things to resolve. And patience, in some ways, I'm pretty good at patience. In other ways, I'm not so good at patience. And once impatience starts up, it's like a contagion. It just starts to infect a lot of different things. So the topic of this title of this talk was supposed to be aimlessness, but that's been out the window for a couple weeks now. So I was struck by a talk by Norman Fisher recently when he started the talk by saying, I'm not going to say anything that you haven't heard before. And I thought, well, then why do we do these talks? What is the purpose of these talks? Why do we do these? And one thing I came up with is we're pretty stubborn. We need to hear the same things over and over again. But another thing I came out of my memory is to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. So I'm pretty sure I heard that from in church someplace or in chapel someplace. And I've heard it more than once in church. So I looked it up, I Googled it, and it actually comes from a newspaper columnist in Chicago. And he thought this was the function of newspapers, to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. So we can see from that Atlantic summary that there's a need for a lot of comfort, but there's also a need to afflict the comfortable. So recently, the fall practice period at Upaya was on the holy teachings of Vimalakirti. And Vimalakirti is especially skillful at afflicting the comfortable. If you're not familiar, I'll go over the. So long ago at MZMC, we had a teaching. Went over the holy teachings of Malakirti, but it had been so long that I'd only remembered the kind of the structure of the story, and I didn't remember any of the teaching, the real teaching at all. And so that's kind of why I enrolled in the practice period. And I wasn't exactly a diligent student of the practice period. I maintained my normal life, but I did hear a lot of the talks, and Upaya does manage to have kind of an all-star team of teachers. So I actually learned quite a bit. So the basis, the context of the holy teachings of Vimalakirti is Vimalakirti is sick. And Vimalakirti is sick because the whole world is sick. So he's in his sick bed and he's alone, and he sends out this message, why isn't anybody coming to see me? And the Buddha, in his psychic skillfulness, because there's a lot of magic and strangeness in this text, picks up on this. So he begins to ask his disciples, say, could you go visit Vimalakirti? Because he's sick. And every one of the disciples has the story. And they all start with, I am reluctant. I am reluctant to visit Vimalakirti because, and then they tell this story where Vimalakirti kind of walks in, takes over, and just kind of embarrasses the disciple in some way, often saying if they were teaching something or consoling somebody, Vimalakirti would say, if you're talking about this, don't talk about it that way, talk about it this way. Or if they're, like there's one where someone is doing takahatsu, begging for meal, says, you know, you're discriminating about whether you're begging in a wealthy neighborhood or a poor neighborhood. You shouldn't be discriminating. So these are all kind of Mahayana teachings about not discriminating and basically not using picking and choosing, but staying with emptiness as much as possible. But in every case, Vimalakirti kind of embarrasses and takes over the situation. And nobody ever bothers to say, Vimalakirti, what are you doing? This was my thing. I was doing it, and you just came in here and took over. Nobody does that, because in almost every case, if there's people that are being taught, these people all of a sudden listening to Vimalakirti have unexcelled, complete, perfect enlightenment. So it's kind of hard to argue with that. So in almost every case, the disciples of the Buddha are rendered speechless because they don't know what to say. But it's like, there's something wrong here. And nobody ever brings this up, but there's something wrong here with the way Vimalakirti is doing this, because he's dispiriting these disciples. These disciples are reluctant to visit him. There's something off about the way Vimalakirti goes about this. And even in some of these early chapters, one chapter, it's all about disciple after disciple after disciple tells these stories. I am reluctant. And then the next chapter is bodhisattvas, walking the earth. Bodhisattvas, celestial beings, have the same story. I was teaching 200 gods about the Dharma. Vimalakirti shows up. Next thing I know, Vimalakirti's taken over. And next thing I know, 200 gods in the celestial realm have achieved perfect enlightenment. So even bodhisattvas are like stunned by this guy, and they say, you know, Vimalakirti's eloquence and understanding is second on earth only to the Buddha. So finally, the Buddha goes through all the bodhisattvas, and he gets to Manjushri, and Manjushri says, you know, I'll go, what the heck, I'll go. And then as soon as people hear that Manjushri is going, everybody says, oh, I got to hear this. So then everybody wants to go. So then everybody goes to Vimalakirti's house, and then the rest of the story goes on. But there's something to me that's off. I mean, it's a good teaching because it's like one example after another of Mahayana teaching, of not discriminating, of not picking and not choosing, and sticking with the purity of emptiness. But it's also these disciples, these bodhisattvas are, something happens that they don't want to see Vimalakirti again unless Manjushri's there. So integrating this with what could go wrong. The way is perfect, and you know, the way is perfect and all pervading. What could go wrong? Well, this is one of the things that can go wrong. People get dispirited. And so I've been reading this book, which came out in the year 2000, Toward a Psychology of Awakening by John Wellwood. And John Wellwood is the fellow who came up with the term spiritual bypassing. So spiritual bypassing has become, I think most people are somewhat familiar with the idea. The spiritual bypassing, I don't know if I want to go into what he talks about, but maybe a little bit, because it's good to get to the source. Spiritual practice involves freeing consciousness from its entanglements in form, matter, emotions, personality, and social condition. In a society like ours, where the whole earthly foundation is weak to begin with, It is tempting to use spirituality as a way of trying to rise above the shaky ground. In this way, spirituality becomes just another way of rejecting one's experience. When people use spiritual practice to try to compensate for low self-esteem, social alienation, or emotional problems, they corrupt the true nature of spiritual practice. Instead of loosening the manipulative ego that tries to control its experience, they are further strengthening it. So I was in the early 70s, before I got into Buddhism, I joined what a lot of people would consider a cult, and spiritual bypassing was the basis of the organization. It was, you were supposed to be in bliss. And if you weren't in bliss, there was something wrong. And that something wrong was not the organization, it was you. So one can pretend, one can present for so long, and then it kind of falls apart. And when it falls apart pretty hard. But there's the spiritual bypassing has a lot of different flavors. So, and it's very, very tempting to, I want to present, I want to skip over these hard parts. And it seems like this is the promise. This is the promise of spiritual practice, that we can get to this other place. It doesn't talk about having to go through all the hard parts. Can't we just skip over that hard part? And so I want to read something from Ryushin Jan Halifax. Because Ryushin Jan Halifax is the abbot in charge of Upaya. She's highly esteemed, very skilled teacher, and very down to earth. So this is something she delivered when she was talking to some, she's doing a lot with medical people, because medical helpers are really in a lot of grief and overworked and struggling these days. So this is kind of about honesty and honest assessment. When my mother died, I received one of the hardest and most precious teachings of my life. One morning, I realized that I only had this one chance to grieve her death. On the one hand, I could be a so-called good Buddhist, accept impermanence and let go of my mother with great dignity. The other alternative was to scour my heart out with honest sorrow. So she chose to scour. So this is a, highly esteemed teacher who's looking at this and says, I could be a so-called good Buddhist, accept impermanence and let go of my mother with great dignity. She could present as this Zen teacher. And the other day at the Second Harvest, I was talking to somebody and they were saying, well, can't you just Zen it out? And so we have this, it's in the common culture. It's like, can't you just Zen it out? It's like, no, this is not honest assessment. This is, so even Joan Halifax has this temptation to be a so-called good Buddhist, accept impermanence and let go of my mother with great dignity. But instead she chose to scour it out. And when that scouring out occurs, that's honest assessment. You're getting down to bedrock at some point. And John Wellwood talks about that as world collapse. World collapse is a very important stage in spiritual development, because all the presentation, all the ego constructions, it's just, they don't hold up to certain world collapse type things that will occur in your life. So there's other things that can go wrong as well. And one of the things, a lot of the things that can go wrong are misinterpreting Buddhist teachings as fitting into something that you wanted to do anyway. So one time at MZMC, there was a woman who showed up and said, my roommate has taken up Buddhist practice, and all she does is sit in her room and meditate. She doesn't come out. She doesn't do anything. She thinks this is the way to go. And at that time, I was in a pretty toxic work environment, and I'm thinking, oh, you know, that sounds pretty good. I would like to be able to do that. But it's like, no, this is not the way to go. This is like, even on my refrigerator, the 10 points of checking out for Alzheimer's, it's like, is this interfering with your everyday activities? So people who want to withdraw can see this as something that, oh yeah, this teaching is telling me to withdraw. This is great. It fits right in with what I'm thinking, because our thinking wants to be so strong that we will manage to warp anything into our own point of view. And there's also related to this is that meditation, this emptiness, this kind of feeling of bliss, it's like, that's the only reality. That's the only thing that's worth doing. And it's not true. Everyday life, it needs to be integrated. It's a oneness thing. It's not an emptiness thing. Emptiness is one part of it. It's oneness that counts. So there's all kinds of ways that people do this. So some of these are John Wellwood's words. People with a dependent personality structure who try to please others in order to gain approval and security, often performing unstinting service for the teacher community in order to feel worthwhile and needed. They confuse a codependent version of self-negation with true selflessness. That's how many people have seen that in a Zen center. People just work and work and work. And it's not like there's a lot of work to do, but there needs to be some respect for boundaries, some respect for taking care of yourself. And there's also this kind of perfection. Things have to be perfect. Things have to be clean. Things have to be, and it's a nice goal, but it becomes obsessive. And so that's another thing that I've seen. Spiritual bypassing often adopts a rationale based on using absolute truth to deny or disparage relative truth. Absolute truth is what is eternally true now and forever beyond any particular viewpoint. When we tap into absolute truth, we can recognize the divine beauty or larger perfection operating in the whole of reality. But you can't live there. So there's lots of different ways that this spiritual bypassing can take place. And what's interesting to me is like the teaching is the weakest link in all this, because the teaching kind of destroys itself. The teaching goes on and says this and says that, and you want to really grasp onto that teaching. And then the teacher comes along, a good teacher comes along and says, you can't hold on to that teaching. You have to let go of that teaching as well. Another occurrence of what can go wrong, and this is even probably more common than spiritual bypassing, is what John Wellwood calls spiritual superego. Another major problem for Western seekers is their susceptibility to the spiritual superego, a harsh inner voice that acts as a relentless critic and judge, telling them that nothing they do is ever quite good enough. You should meditate more and practice harder. You're too self-centered. You don't have enough devotion. This critical voice keeps track of every failure to practice or to live up to the teaching, so that practice becomes more oriented towards propitiating this judgmental part of themselves than opening unconditionally to life. So that's a tough one because that's kind of built into the culture. I mean, we're not enough. Advertisers tell us that we're not enough. Sometimes people in authority tell us that we're not enough. And sometimes, so one of the possible titles for this talk is Enough is Enough. So there's two different ways to look at that. Enough is enough is like when you're finally fed up. Enough is enough, you let go. But there's also this side that enough is enough is enough is enough. Enough is satisfying enough. So I kind of had a little breakthrough for enough is enough when I went on vacation to the North Shore with a friend of mine. And I go to bed early and I get up early. He would go to bed out of politeness to me, and then he would stay up and read, and then he would get up later. So I would be sitting in the cabin, which did not have any access to the internet, which was nice. And so I would be there every morning for the sunrise over Lake Superior. We were right on Lake Superior. And that may sound pretty dramatic, but it was foggy. Almost every day was foggy, but it was so nice. It was just, enough was enough. I didn't need the sun. I didn't need a spectacular sunrise. It was just, enough was enough. Just getting away from my impatience from all the things that I'm dealing with at home, enough was enough. And we would go on. So some days the fog was over the lake and it would come in to shore, and other days it would be off the lake and it would be up on the hill. So we were hiking different parts of the Superior hiking trail. And so the Superior hiking trail, basically a lot of the high points are literally high points. You walk up an overlook that has the Lake Superior off to one side, and then usually has a wide valley, and then there's other ridges or overlooks across the wide valley. So you're usually on resistant rock, like 2 billion year old resistant rock, and the glaciers came and sculpted out the wide valley. It doesn't take much imagination to see that when the sun is out. But day after day, we would climb these overlooks and there would be fog. And so these overlooks where we were supposed to see this mountain or that mountain would just be like 30 feet out from the overlook. There would be this blank fog, like a blanket or a gray wall. And it was somehow strangely familiar. It was just like sitting zazen and staring at a wall. There it was, that wall. And it was really wonderful. It was really nice not to have the expectation demanding to see this, spectacular overlook, but instead you're seeing just blank. It was kind of nice. And my friend that I go with is a photographer. So one of the nice things about hiking, I like hiking. I like moving through the woods. I spent most of my childhood in the woods in Western Pennsylvania. So I like, and the northern woods are even, I think, more spectacular, more fun to be in. So my friend, a photographer, we're moving through the woods. Every once in a while, he'll see something that he wants to take a picture of. Well, since at one time he was a professional photographer, these aren't just like stop for a minute. It's like a 20-minute stop, and he'll scope things out, and he'll bracket things, and he'll take different angles and all this stuff. And one time we stopped at this place that was under normal circumstances would have been a little damp bog, but under the circumstances of the drought, it was more dry. but we saw some mushrooms. And so we're dealing with things that are rocks that are 2 billion years old. And we're looking at trees, you know, we want to see trees that are old, ancient trees. And these mushrooms last for 2 or 3 days after rain in the fall. And there's like 5 or 6 different varieties. And once we stopped and we started looking around, they were everywhere, all these different mushrooms. And it's like this life is just coming up. This life is like the mycelium mushroom community is like all over under the ground, and every once in a while things pop up, and they only last for 2 or 3 days. It was just remarkable. It's just this sense of life, because once we stopped and started looking in one place, then you'd see something else, then you'd see something else, then you'd see something else. There's just a sense of this abundance of life. So it's like enough is enough. Enough was more than enough. It's like was just really, really there. So it was like that. Well, some of the best parts of the hikes were when we stopped and weren't hiking. So I'm already at 10 o'clock. Okay. So I wanted to read, trying to find the purpose of these talks. I did find in Harada Seki Roshi's book, translated by Daigaku Urumi, the purpose of Zazen. The purpose of Zazen is to find great satisfaction in every moment, down to the smallest detail of your everyday life. Simply to be able to abide peacefully in the law of cause and effect can be said to be the end result of Zazen. To serenely accept and live with your condition right now as the result of cause and effect means that the need for any kind of apology or excuse on your part disappears. Most people live their lives constantly apologizing or making excuses for the state in which they find themselves. This is because the ego self is perceived to exist in opposition to law of cause and effect. We want things to be different than they are, but enough is enough. That's what he's saying. He's throw yourself into the law of cause and effect. Throw yourself into the law of impermanence. And what the heck, you're already there. It's kind of, that's why the teachings are kind of crazy in a way. Because the teachings are dual. So there's a chapter in the Holy Teachings of Malakirti where the bodhisattvas are asked to say a few words about entering into emptiness. So one bodhisattva after another has a little paragraph about how to enter into emptiness. And then Manjushri at the end, when the bodhisattvas had given their explanations, they all addressed the crown prince Manjushri. Manjushri, what is the bodhisattva's entrance into non-duality? Manjushri replied, good sirs, you have all spoken well. Nevertheless, all your explanations are themselves dualistic. To know no one teaching, to express nothing, to say nothing, to explain nothing, to announce nothing, to indicate nothing, and to designate nothing, that is the entrance to non-duality. Then the crown prince Manjushri said to Vimalakirti, we have all given our own teachings, noble sir. Now may you elucidate the teaching of the entrance into the principle of non-duality. Thereupon Vimalakirti kept his silence, saying nothing at all. So this is kind of condensed into Vimalakirti's thunderous silence. But you see how Manjushri has painted him into a corner here. Just like Vimalakirti has taken over everybody in the beginning with all these stories, Manjushri has painted Vimalakirti that you can't say anything. to know no one teaching, to express nothing, to say nothing, to explain nothing, to announce nothing, to indicate nothing, to designate nothing. That is the entrance into non-duality. What is Vimalakirti supposed to say at that point? He can't say anything. So he's as speechless as all the disciples that he renders in the beginning. So there's another extraordinary passage. So a goddess notices all this stuff going on because there's magic and whatnot in this teaching. So this was a bestseller in China for some reason, right? We think of the Chinese as being so practical and down to earth, and this, with all the magic and strangeness that's going on in here, it was very popular. So the goddess at some point says, liberation is freedom from desire, hatred, and folly. That is the teaching for the excessively proud. But those free of pride are taught that the very nature of desire, hatred, and folly is itself liberation. Liberation is freedom from desire, hatred, and folly. That is the teaching for the excessively proud. But those free of pride are taught that the very nature of desire, hatred, and folly is itself liberation. This is, I think, akin to Harada Roshi saying, just throw yourself into the law of cause and effect. And this is also medicine and sickness subdue each other. The whole world is medicine. This is the oneness that goes on. We have teaching, we have practice, and then spiritual practice is about the spirit. And that's what I think was wrong with the way Vimalakirti was teaching. He was dispiriting the disciples, embarrassing them, humiliating them in some ways. So somehow we have to have the spirit to throw ourselves into the law of cause and effect, to throw ourselves into impermanence. Allow, like Joan Halifax says, the grief occasionally to scour ourselves, to do an honest assessment. Where does that spirit come from? That's the ends. That's the beginning, middle, and end. So this is the end. Where does that spirit come from? So Katagiri Roshi used to talk about being wholehearted in everything you do. And then Shokin has taken that up and over again. He says, be able to stand up in your life, wanting to stand up in your life. I heard a podcast from Tara Brach, and basically she was pretty hot stuff 5, 6, 7 years ago with the recognize, accept, investigate, nurture. But she was part of this enough is enough thing. She was saying, enough is enough. When you're in that state of enough is enough, that state is so true, so much more real than any story you can tell about yourself. That's quite a startling statement. When you're in that world of openness, in that world of acceptance, that's more true than any story you can tell yourself. So Winona LaDuke is a very fierce defender of land protector, water protector, land rights, climate change advocate. She was being interviewed and she was asked, what advice would you give people for guidance for things they can do? What can they do? Because they seem so overwhelmed and so powerless. And Winona LaDuke, being the fierce person that she is, and thank God there's fierce people like this out there. She said, what can you do? She said, grow up. Grow up and quit thinking of yourself as powerless. There's a poem that I may have read before, written by Jennifer Wellwood, who is the wife of John Wellwood. It continues with the same theme. My friends, let's grow up. Let's stop pretending we don't know the deal here. Or if we truly haven't noticed, let's wake up and notice. Look, everything that can be lost will be lost. It's simple. How could we have missed it for so long? Let's grieve our losses fully, like ripe human beings. But please, let's not be so shocked by them. Let's not act so betrayed, as though life had broken her secret promise to us. Impermanence is life's only promise to us, and she keeps it with ruthless impeccability. To a child, she seems cruel, but she is only wild, and her compassion exquisitely precise, brilliantly penetrating, luminous with truth. She strips away the unreal to show us the real. This is the true ride. Let's give ourselves to it. Let's stop making deals for a safe passage. There isn't one anyway, and the cost is too high. We are not children anymore. The true human adult gives everything for what cannot be lost. Let's dance the wild dance of no hope. So this kind of grow up thing, I don't know, it kind of inspires me. I don't know if it would work for everybody, but it kind of works for me. It's kind of because the resources are there. And to close, I want to read a few statements, the mission statement of one of these kitchens that I volunteer at, because Katagiri Roshi used to say, you can't wait till everything's just right before you reach out. You have to reach out and the universe will be there. That's faith. That's spiritual practice. So this is one of the values of Open Arms where I volunteer. Abundance. We operate on the abundance model, believing that the resources and compassion we need to support our work are available in our community. We are committed to making best use of our resources, volunteer time, community relationships, and donor generosity. So it's a charitable organization and it's completely dependent on volunteer labor. And they ask every week. They have shifts now that don't have quite the same number that they would like, but they operate on this model, believing that the resources and compassion we need to support our work are available. And they get them. They get a tremendous amount of work done. And then they have another that says innovation. We take calculated risks to expand our thinking, programming, and worldview, and to actively seek creative responses to local and global challenges. This ensures that we stay on the cutting edge in all that we do, from growing ingredients to delivering meals, and meet the growing needs of our services proactively. So this is kind of a reaching out, kind of growing up. So that's a pretty good place to end, especially with planning going on. I sincerely hope planning works on these same principles, that the resources, compassion, Hokyoji needs to support their work will be available in the community. Thank you. So comments, questions? Go ahead.
Hey, thank you for your talk, Ryushin. Really enjoyed it. I'm glad I know you personally because I have a lot that I would like to discuss with you about this talk. We don't have time for that probably. Well, as you know, like my main areas of interest right now, and probably for a long time, are emotional integration, understanding spiritual bypassing, and understanding how to work with trauma. So your talk really like hit or like kind of approached like all of those points. So I really appreciated it. So if we have time for one little thing that I might ask about, let's see. I mean, there was like a lot. The enough is enough thing really resonated with me. That could be like my koan right now. I have a lot going on. The two aspects of enough and enough really resonate with me right now. Maybe the thing about cleanness and neatness and how that can become obsessive that you were talking about. Do you remember the part that I'm talking about? It's interesting to me because I think that's probably true. And then I'm kind of in the opposite position at the moment, in that I'm in a situation that's very messy, and it's like at some point it's too messy. It's like this isn't helpful. This isn't something I can work with, and I'm getting I think like pretty clear emotional cues that this just isn't working. So it's time to work with that enough is enough koan, both that enough is enough in kind of the conventional sense of, okay, enough. And also it's enough, and kind of finishing up with what you left off with, coming from a principle of abundance, that having some faith that the resources that you need are actually out there or inside. So I don't know if that made any sense, but I really appreciated your talk anyway. Thank you.
I think there are times when you want to go back in your room and just sit for a while.
Yeah.
and like, why couldn't I get to that same spot when I was at home that I managed to get when I, in this primitive cabin off on the lake, on Lake Superior. It's just a change of scene, just kind of opened things up. And it was, it's a much simpler existence in some ways than my home life, right? So it's like, it's good to clear things out now and again. But, one of the things that Erin said last week that she heard from somebody else that really, really struck me was, somebody was talking about invasive species and trying to plant native plants, and he basically concluded with just plant flowers, don't overthink it, just plant flowers. And it's like, just plant flowers, just plant flowers, whatever that means to you. I mean, to me it means literally planting flowers, but it also means doing good works, doing what you can, and then letting things go. Because I did learn a few things from that first spiritual organization, and one of the things they talked about was you plant a seed, but you don't dig up the seed every 2 days to see how it's doing. You let the seed go. You don't. You're going to disturb things if you want to check in on it and see what's going on. So I don't know if that even applies, but I think it does. Just So you just plant flowers. You just do what you can, and flowers get messy at times.
I think that's so true. And thank you for that. And exactly at the same time, I can see how that could so easily go off the rails and be abused in an organization such as the one that you're talking about. Like saying, oh yeah, you don't need to consider what's going on. It'll all work out. It's good. Stay with the bliss thing. Happy thoughts, happy thoughts, happy thoughts.
Yeah, I saw some headline, something about toxic positivity. And oh yeah, toxic positivity. You can have toxic negativity, but you can have toxic positivity too. It's just, you can turn anything toxic. It's
Hey,
that's
Jan.
why this.
Yeah, Jan, is this question is, as you might know, I'm very interested in prairies and have the discussion about invasive. That's always an issue. And the question I ask, when does an invasive eventually become a citizen? Yeah, see, this is, it's sort of like, how long do you have to be in this country before you're not an invasive anymore? You know, so that's a, you know, Jen, I think you did really a nice job to kind of trace the evolution that when we start meditation, because I know when I started, I thought meditation was a shortcut that I could fly over the swamp instead of walking through it.
Yeah.
And I think another thing, because of my psychology training, I ran across this idea that you have to be someone before you can be no one. And I think, and one thing that I think I was quite disappointed in my practice in Buddhism, I always thought that was not necessary, but how many teachers actually have gone to counseling or therapy once they were teachers, because they had to become someone, a complete someone, before they could really go beyond that. And I always thought that to meditation, you wouldn't have to do that, which is nonsense. You know, that's the bypass idea, is, you know, that inoculates you from those kind of things. And I always thought meditation was the most efficient way to go to happiness. Which is, you know, it's, anyway, Jen, I appreciated you talk.
No, this what you're talking about is exactly what John Wellwood is talking about, because he's a psychologist.
Right.
And so he noticed all these things. So he's got like a vested interest to see these things, but it's also true. So he brings up the cultural differences a lot between children who are raised in Asian cultures and children who are raised in Western cultures. One of his points is children raised in Asian cultures are treated like little gods. They grow up with such confidence and self-esteem, and that is not the case with Western children. We're told pretty early on that we have to do this to have self-esteem. We have to do that to have self-esteem. It's not something that's built in. And then he has various stories of people who have, you know, powerful spiritual experiences, and then they try to manifest that realization, and then there's all these obstructions, as you say, that they can't, things are in the way because they haven't dealt with them.
Right. Yeah, I was surprised the first time I read when the Dalai Lama said the same thing what you're saying, how surprised he was that Westerners came feeling so bad about themselves. You know, he had the same experience. And I suppose that's the Christian tradition. We inherit that from our parents, that we're incomplete and we have to work hard to become complete.
Well, even this phrase of afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted, it's like, well, that's kind of never ending, isn't it? I mean, if you do the one, then you're working on the other one. So it's
well, you know, as far as your in the beginning you mentioned, when I said with Katagiri Roshi, I swore he gave the same talk, you know, the same cup of tea, but holding it with 100 different fingers. You know, that it seems to me, it is always the same. And right now I'm going also to the Unitarian Church, and the minister gives the same talk. In a sense, depends how, you know, how high off the ground you are to look at the talk, you know, and because I think as human beings, we're very stubborn, and we have an incredible short memory for some things. And I think the only thing I have really learned well, you know, is when I had to suffer. Suffering is really quite a gift.
Yeah, I've heard Norman Fisher say the same thing. He's actually said that he would like to suffer more because he's a better person when he suffers more.
You know, is suffering, I think, scours more deeply than any other approach we have. You know, going back to that story of the heart. Yeah. And we're so allergic to suffering. Go to the drugstore and how many bottles of you to have for headaches or whatever you have, you know, the choices. So it's basically, you know, we always are so inclined to run instead of staying and being with things. And the running can be physically or it's mostly mentally.
You know, I was going to bring up an image that the first time I went to Oregon, I saw a sea otter, and it wasn't a very pleasant day at the ocean. It was windy and the waves were choppy and coming from a couple different directions. And the sea otter was between two sets of rocks, and he was just out there, just bobbing away. He was having. This is just another day for him. It says, okay. And he's watching me and I'm watching him, and I'm thinking, he must be watching me because he can't figure out what kind of animal would be out here looking at the ocean with the wind and the rain in their face when I'm here with my back to the wind.
Or Jen, he was happy to have company.
Well, that's what I found out later, is that a few years after that, the sea otters were disappeared from Washington and Oregon, and they're just now coming back. That's why I even thought of the story. What? I saw one back in 1971, but I saw one, but they're usually not off by themselves. They're usually in a family group. So. Community, abundance.
You know, your Malakirti stories are really good. You know, you know what? I think Malakirti you were kind of hard on him. I would be the other way. I would say, I really appreciate them because, you know, our explanation, we love them so much that every time we parade them or share them, they become more real from us. So it's really good, somebody who destroys them, that we start over. You know, because our propensity is to be habitual. And I think he has no taste for habitualness. You know, what every explanation you give, I think that's just so delightful. I would say, this is the guy to hang out with. because he's
Yeah.
upsetting. He's frustrating. And frustration is a great teacher.
Well, this comes back to Dokai a couple of weeks ago talked about suffering is unsettling.
Yes.
And I thought that was that's so great. And so Vimalakirti, that's what he's all about. He's into unsettling everything, stirring it all up again. So
Is staying awake at the edge of not knowing, because knowing is always the booby prize. And we love booby prizes, Instead of living in the question, we just love to have an answer. But the answer should be very temporary because things change all the time.
yeah.
So is answers should be like Kleenex that you use during a cold. You get rid of them right now. Not kind of dry them and hang them on a line and see how many Kleenex you have now. They're very dispensable. So Malakirti, Jen, I always like your talk because the oxygenate a lot of things in me, and I like to play Malakirti with you by disagreeing with you, and I think it's good for both of us.
Well, I was trying to find what I thought I read in the Harada Seki Roshi book, but I couldn't find it. I don't know where I think I found this, but I think he said his goal for his students was to take them back before they'd ever heard anything about Buddhism.
Say that again, I was dropped.
His goal was to take his students back to before they had ever heard anything about Buddhism. But I
Because,
may have made that up, so I don't know.
but that's really good though, Jen, because anything you heard, do you see, we make it permanent and it's impermanent. We embalm our life, so it stays. So it's, in memory is it's a cognitive embalming process. Because real life is always, like to say, you can step in the same river twice. There's a good reason for that. It's always changing, but we like, instead of having plums, we always insist on making all plums into prunes because they last longer. That's a form of embalming a plum, is to making it into a prune.
I'm going to jump in just to keep us on schedule, but also to get a last comment. And I guess it's the privilege of my role. But I too wanted to say thanks, Jan. I thought this was a great talk, and I feel, as the others did, that these are really valuable topics. And there's certainly topics that are really important for me. I share everyone's interest that I heard expressed in spiritual bypassing and emotional integration, and sort of trying to understand. I'm trying to understand, as I'm sure you are, of what our practice is, what it is, as I go along. I learn more. Something I just wanted to add was kind of it's implicit in what you said, but I like to say it out loud when I can, sort of to advocate. It's kind of a pitch, which is just, I want to encourage us all to well, one way of talking about it is when you say, for example, that suffering is a good teacher, that's absolutely true. But the way I want to say it is that sometimes we need different kinds of supports to go through our suffering in a way where we can be with it and learn from it. And so I just want to encourage always in our Zen communities and in our own lives to explore different kinds of supports and view taking care of ourselves emotionally as part of our practice. Like when I heard you were quoting John Wellwood talking about some examples of some of the sort of common emotional conditioning that leads to spiritual bypassing. And some of these things, as we were saying, might be kind of endemic in our culture. Well, how do we take care of those underlying things? I mean, so many people have, so many people have low self-esteem or different kinds of negativity about ourselves, that they come from the culture, they come from generational cycles of abuse and neglect in families. They come from, violence in our environment that is endemic. So we need, I'm suggesting we need different kinds of supports to as individuals and in our relationships, to be able to sort of look at the specific details of our emotional inner lives and take care of those things. Anyway, I'm going on too long.
That's what I wanted to point out with the three things: the teaching, the practice, and then there's the spirit. Where do we get this spirit? The spirit is the support. So you have to have spiritual practice is about spirit. You have to gut it out. If you can't zen it out, you got to gut it out, right? So thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry for taking up so much time. Let's let's close with the 4 vows, which I'm feeling spacey this morning, so hopefully I won't forget. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Bye.
Thank you.
See you next time.
See ya.